Welcome to the Opportunity Zones podcast. I'm Jimmy Atkinson. On December 3rd, Novogradac & Company is hosting the Novogradac 2025 Opportunity Zones Summit in Las Vegas, Nevada. And here to discuss that upcoming event, as well as the latest OZ 2.0 news, are Novogradac partners Jason Watkins and Kevin Wilson. Gentlemen, thanks for joining the show. Welcome. It's great to see both of you.
Hey, always happy to be here, Jimmy.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jimmy. I know we've been on multiple panels in the past, but this is my first, and I've been following your podcast, for years, but this is my first time joining. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We've had Mike on the show. We've had John Scheretti on the show. Jason Watkins, no stranger to the show. Brent Parker's been on once or twice. And this is our first interview here with Kevin Wilson. So happy to have you joining us from Novogradac here on the Opportunity Zones podcast, Kevin. And Jason, always great to see you as well. Now, gentlemen, before we dive in, I want to talk a little bit about your upcoming OZ Summit in Las Vegas on December 3rd. It's a one-day Opportunity Zone event. It's taking place at the Four Seasons on the Vegas Strip. That date, again, is December 3rd, 2025. OpportunityZones.com is a media partner for the event. So I'm going to be there. I'm speaking on one of the OZ 2.0 panels. I look forward to meeting a lot of people in the industry that I haven't had a chance to meet yet. So if you do come to the show, please stop by and say hi. This event that Novogradac puts on, it's top-notch. It's always well attended by many of the top professionals in the Opportunity Zone space. It's a great event to learn about Opportunity Zones and network with others in the industry. You can learn more about the conference and purchase registration by heading to Novogradac's website at novoco.com. That's NOVOCO.com. And podcast listeners can now save 10% at checkout by using promo code OZ10. That's OZ10. Please be sure to include that promo, and we're going to be sure to include that promo code and link to the registration page on our show notes for today's episode, which you can find at opportunityzones.com/podcast. One additional plug before we get going here. I'm also going to be hosting our OZ Insiders Members Dinner at the Mandalay Bay the night before the Novogradac OZ Summit. That dinner is going to take place on December 2nd. We just booked the venue there. You can learn more about that event and about joining OZ Insiders by heading to ozinsiders.com. Now, Jason and Kevin and I are going to discuss the conference and the OZ Insiders dinner in more detail a bit later in today's episode. But first, for anybody new to the show, my audience of high net worth investors, advisors, other Opportunity Zone stakeholders, they may already be familiar with Novogradac, but in case anybody's new to the show or is not familiar, can one of you briefly explain who is Novogradac & Company and what are the services that your firm provides to the Opportunity Zones industry?
Sure. We're a full service public accounting firm, a national firm. I think we're in the top 35 as far as firm size goes. We've been around for, what's it been now, 35 years. Our firm specializes in tax credit type transactions, and we got involved in the Opportunity Zones incentive pretty early on. It was actually before it was even introduced into Congress. We were already made aware of the incentive and had some work to do as far as helping make sure that it was going to work properly once it was introduced. And so we've been working very heavily in the space ever since. But besides Opportunity Zones, our firm specializes in low-income housing tax credits, new markets tax credits, renewable energy, historic tax credits, and a wide range of associated and market rate type work, market rate real estate. So we work pretty heavily in that space, full service accounting firm, so audits and tax returns and OZ compliance are what we'll probably talk about some here today, but that's what we do. Kevin has been here longer than I have, so if Kevin has anything he wants to add, please feel free to jump in.
Sure. Yeah. And yeah, specifically in the context of Opportunity Zones, we work with investors through every step of the process and through every tier of this multi-tier structure that we typically end up with, with the QOZBs and the QOFs. So we do a lot of work on the front end with transaction structuring, which may include some financial modeling and definitely planning around the tax statute and the regulatory guidance that we have. And, we're going through a lot of changes with that now, and we're getting a lot of questions about that and helping our clients work through these changes. So
yeah,
a lot of exciting times.
Absolutely exciting times. A lot of changes coming with OZ 2.0 being introduced in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was signed into law this past July. I'm going to talk about OZ 2.0 with you gentlemen in a moment. But first, one of the biggest services I feel that Novogradac provides to the industry is the fundraising survey that you run on a quarterly basis. You issue reports on how much equity has been raised in the previous quarter. And to date, I believe your survey has shown that well over $40 billion of equity has been raised by qualified opportunity funds. You do caveat that you estimate you're only capturing roughly 1/3 to 1/4 of the total universe of qualified opportunity funds out there. So if you extrapolate from that number, like I do, I say, based on Novogradac's numbers, I think we can safely estimate there's been at least $150 billion of equity raised, thereabouts, in that ballpark, roughly. You had an update not too long ago that brought in data from the end of Q2 of this year, 2025. What's the current status of OZ fundraising, according to your latest survey reports?
Well, fundraising has continued. The most recent quarter that's published, we're just a few days away from having our third quarter stuff ready. But through second quarter of 2025, we had over $1 billion of new equity raised just during the second quarter of 25, which is one of the larger quarters over the last few years. There's this sort of expectation that there's going to be this big wind down. We refer to it as the dead zone, where there's going to be this wind down of capital raised between now and 2026. It hasn't really fully started yet, at least through second quarter. Now, keeping in mind
it's interesting though that the cutoff for, if we think about the timeline, the cutoff for that second quarter estimate was 4 days before Opportunity Zones 2.0 was passed as part of a much larger budget reconciliation bill. So these future estimates, and again, we've been doing these estimates for how many years now? 5+
we started
years?
this in 2019.
Yeah.
So we're 6 years in.
On a recurring basis. So we publish these reports a few times a year to kind of show the ongoing results of these surveys.
And the results in the first few years, it was pretty sharply up and to the right. And it's, I would say, coming out of 2021 into 2022, after those basis step-ups expired, the curve kind of started leveling off a little bit and flattening a little bit. But it's had a couple of upticks since then. And I think this recent one that you're referring to from Q2 of this year showed another little uptick. And Jason, you just pointed out that you're going to have Q3 survey results in the next few days here. Likely by the time this episode airs, we may have those survey results. And if so, I'll link to them in the show notes for today's episode at opportunityzones.com/podcast. But any final thoughts on the status of fundraising and what you're expecting over the next 12 to 24 months?
Well, I can tell you over the next 14 months, right? So now through the end of December, we do expect to slow down, just because of these additional benefits that are going to be available to investors that are able to time their capital gains so that they can make their investment January 1st, 2027 or later. As your listeners and viewers I'm sure they're aware, that's when some of the new benefits, the automatic 5-year deferral period, as well as the 10% basis step up, go into effect, is for investments happening on or after January 1st, 2027. So probably some flattening between now and then it's going to look like a tangent curve almost, where it's going to skyrocket.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, Jimmy, you mentioned that the initial trend was, going up, and then it started to come down as some of these incentives started to expire. And that's just the way the Opportunity Zones 1.0, which we're calling it, was structured. One of the big changes between 1.0 and 2.0 is that now we have this kind of rolling deferral, which should, I think, once we get beyond this time period that Jason's talking about, lead to more stability.
Yeah, because then in the OZ 2.0, starting for investments made into QOFs on January 1, 2027, there's no ticking clock. There's the 180-day clock when your gain is triggered, but none of the benefits of investing in a QOF expire. The benefits of investing in a QOF in 27 will be the same as they are in 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, and so on. until they change the law, which I don't think anybody has any plans to change this anytime too soon, at least. Well, let's shift gears and talk about OZ 2.0. I've covered it in great detail on this podcast and inside of our mastermind group at OZ Insiders over the last several months. So we don't need to recap all of the changes, but I'm just curious to hear, and we're recording this in the middle of October. At this point in time, what are you hearing from some of your clients? What are their concerns? What are you guys working on with regards to OZ 2.0? What's some of the latest news that you're hearing, if anything, from Treasury as to how they're going to provide some ongoing guidance for transitioning from 1.0 into 2.0?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting a lot of calls from practitioners, folks who are looking to use this incentive to bring this capital into their communities, right? There's definitely a lot of renewed interest and excitement given the changes and the sort of clarity that we have going forward. But for those of you who have been following this process throughout, as the legislation made its way through Congress, we kind of had like a list of enhancements that we thought might have been helpful here. And, a couple of the first items on the list got their way into the statute here, right? With permanence and rolling deferrals. But there's still, I do a lot of work in affordable housing. And then I've also been working very closely with a number of operating businesses, right? And a couple of the enhancements that are kind of geared towards either combining with other affordable housing incentives or making it easier for operating businesses didn't quite make their way in. So we're working through some of those issues, getting a lot of calls on that. And I think, some of the regulatory guidance that I know Jason's been working on are kind of some of the pathways that we're exploring to address some of those concerns.
Yeah. So Jason, what are some of the regulatory issues that you see that you'd like to get resolved? What's high on the priority list?
Yeah, and as we've discussed here before, Novogradac hosts an Opportunity Zones working group, and so we've been sort of planning for this moment for a long time. Like Kevin mentioned, there were a lot of things that we would have liked to have seen in the legislation that didn't make it in, but we think there may be a path to resolving some of those issues through the regulatory process. So our working group is working on a series of letters, recommendation letters that'll be going into Treasury for some of these topics. So the first letter, which is, we're treating it as sort of immediate OZ guidance that's necessary. And this is the biggest question we're getting from everyone right now, is this transition from Opportunity Zones 1.0 to 2.0. What does that mean? What does it mean if, when an Opportunity Zone, a currently designated zone, loses its designation, which is going to happen December 31st, 2028. Now, some of those census tracts may be redesignated as part of the upcoming round that'll go into effect in 27, but many of them won't be. And so there's a lot of concern from all the stakeholders really in the OZ industry of what happens if I'm constructing a project, particularly we'll say real estate, constructing a real estate project in an area that's currently a zone, but that zone loses its designation. Does my project still qualify? And we don't know at this point. We don't know exactly what the guidance is going to yield. We know what it needs to yield, which is that there needs to be a way for projects that have reached a certain level of completion, or at least cost incurred by these stakeholders, that those can continue to qualify. And so that's our number one request and recommendation, is that for there to be very specific transition guidance provided by Treasury to incentivize and encourage investors to continue to invest in these existing opportunity zones and not to just stop because this fear that, well, what happens if I don't complete my project in time and it doesn't qualify? That could be pretty expensive investor.
And there was actually a bill that was introduced, OZTIA, right? The Opportunity Zone Transparency Extension Improvement Act, that had language that would address this. Obviously, it was introduced, never enacted, but we're hopeful that language similar to what was proposed in that bill might be addressed through the regulations to provide clarity for these businesses that are developing property in existing zones that may not be redesignated.
Yes, your hope is that Treasury adopts a lot of that language in that from that proposed legislation from a few years back to fix a lot of these issues, because that language was already circulated widely in the industry. It's been more or less approved by your group, Novogradac, and your Opportunity Zones working group as well as being viable for the industry to work with. A question I have for you, Jason, I don't know if you had other regulatory issues you wanted to go into. I'll give you a moment to do that in a moment here. But my question is, in the case of an OZ 1.0 project, so a project located in an OZ 1.0 tract that, let's say, is not an OZ 2.0 tract, in that 2-year overlap period, 27 and 28, you'll be able to have investors in QOFs achieve the OZ 2.0 benefits. Are those OZ 2.0 dollars able to deploy into projects in 1.0 tract at that point in time? Or is that kind of an open-ended question we don't know the answer to either?
I don't think that's open-ended.
Yeah, we think that's the case.
You do think that's the case?
We're certainly going to try to get clarification on that, but everything is pointing towards there being a 2-year overlap of the 1.0 census tracts and the 2.0 census tracts, since the benefits go into effect for investments made January 1st, 2027 or later. If those dollars go into existing OZ tracts through the end of 2028, there should be no issue there.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. That's been one of the most common questions I've gotten.
Substantial improvement threshold for rural properties, right? Which we think is available now, right? So
right. It's really interesting. And Jimmy, I saw you've already had at least one of your podcasts talked about this, but the IRS Notice 2025-50 that came out that identified all of the current Opportunity Zone tracts that are rural and that are eligible for this substantial improvement, this reduced substantial improvement threshold that's available. Just to recap real quick, typically in an OZ deal, if you buy a property that's previously been placed in service by another taxpayer, in order for that property to qualify, you have to improve it by at least 100% of what your original acquisition price was. And this reduced substantial improvement threshold in rural areas reduces that number to 50%. Yeah. So there's a pretty big incentive. And where we're asking for some clarification, we were really super excited that they so quickly got that out. That Treasury was able to get that, and IRS was able to get that notice out so quickly to identify them, because there were a lot of questions around what exactly was meant by the language in the legislation. So that sort of resolves that.
There's a little bit of confusion too, because there's that particular benefit for properties in rural areas. But then there's another one for investment in rural qualified opportunity funds where you get a larger step up. And that one doesn't kick in until 2027. So there's one of the benefits that's live now, and the other one kind of have to wait a little while for.
What we want to know is that if you read through the language in that IRS notice, it appears that it's retroactive. So it applies to properties that have already been purchased and potentially improved, maybe by less than 100%, which could retroactively make those properties eligible. It's because of the wording in the notice that basically says that as long as a determination has not been made regarding the substantial improvement prior to July 4th, 2025. So the question is, well, determination by whom? Presumably it means the IRS. So it would seem potentially to retroactively apply. So that's one of the clarifying items we intend to hopefully get clarification on from Treasury through this initial comment letter that we're sending in.
Oh, that's great. Okay, that'd be big for, I'm sure, for some qualified opportunity funds if that does apply retroactively. So we discussed the transition rules. We discussed the overlap 1.0 and 2.0 tracts both being active and applicable through 27 and 28. We discussed some of the rural incentives. What else is on your radar, if anything, for what you're looking to Treasury to clarify with some additional guidance?
Well, one more sort of initial thing that we'd like to get clarification on is the expiration of the special rule for Puerto Rico, which I know you and I have talked about before.
Yes.
And that special rule expires effective December 31st, 2026. What we want clarification on is whether that means that all of the Puerto Rico current OZ track designations end on December 31st, 2026, and will be replaced by the next OZ 2.0, or whether that expiration only applies to future designations and that the current designations would continue on through the end of 2028, same as they do for the rest of the country. And the language is not 100% clear.
The language isn't 100% clear, but I think most of the industry, maybe all of the industry, seems to be in alignment on what the language should mean, which is that that only applies to their it would only apply to their future designations for 2.0, but their existing tracks would remain in place through 28, just like every other states, right?
I think we're all comfortable that that's what it should mean.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice to know with certainty.
For sure. It'd be nice to get an explicit ruling from the IRS. Any other OZ 2.0 issues that you're tracking or that you're hearing from your clients?
There's a lot.
Maybe you can highlight one or two more, and we can move on. Because I know we can talk about this for probably another 2 hours if we wanted to.
Right. I mean, there are things we need to know. I think we'll need to know prior to the implementation of the next round. So before January 1st, but of 27. But I think it's important to revisit and look at some of the longer term policy of the affordable housing and operating businesses.
Good. Kevin, anything else that you're tracking regarding OZ 2.0?
Might be addressed through Treasury regulations, right? But then some of these issues, when the Treasury is drafting these regs, they may suggest that they don't have the statutory authority to clarify some of these issues. But we can still have the conversation, right? For example, a big one is further aligning the opportunity zone incentive with the affordable housing, low-income housing tax credit, right? Where for opportunity zones, you have to substantially improve the property for an existing property to qualify for the affordable housing tax credit. There's a slightly lower threshold. And so, there's a suggestion that further aligning that substantial improvement threshold could be achieved through the Treasury regulations and would make it easier to sort of leverage these two tax incentives together. So.
Yeah, that would be helpful to see some additional guidance on that. I agree. Well, let's shift gears now. I want to talk about what we previewed at the beginning of the episode, your upcoming conference, the 2025 Opportunity Zone Summit in Las Vegas at the Four Seasons, December 3rd, 2025. What should attendees expect? And what are you guys looking forward to the most?
It's going to be just a great summit. There's so much to talk about this year. We've been talking about the what ifs, I think, in our previous summits the last few years, and now it's very much identified. We have permanence for OZ 2.0. Where are we going? How are people, how are investors, how are funds, how are businesses responding to the permanency? And there's certainly just a tremendous level of interest. I think with the first round of opportunity zones, it seemed like a lot of people didn't understand it until some of the benefits had already expired, and so they didn't bother to really learn that much about it. It was a shorter term deferral. They didn't really want to get involved. And I think everyone now is revisiting this. All the family offices are looking at it. Every accounting firm and every law firm that does real estate transaction type work is learning opportunity zones now. And so this is a great place to really get to network and also to learn a lot about where things are, what stakeholders are thinking about the OZ incentive, and where we expect and hope things will go. So it's going to be a great day. It's filled with sessions that will be discussing various aspects of the OZ incentive. We typically start off with a Washington Wire focused panel, which is going to really look at where things are at in the legislative and regulatory fronts.
That environment is changing so rapidly, right? And so those Washington reports are just a great way to introduce the concept introduce the conference and let everyone know what's happening like to the minute, right? We're in a significant government shutdown right now. Who knows what things are going to look like a month and a half when we're all meeting in Vegas, but there's definitely going to be a lot to unpack there. And that's why we always kind of start off the conferences with these Washington reports.
Yeah, and then after the Washington report, there's going to be a series of panels. We have a fabulous group of speakers, Jimmy, which you are one of. But we're really looking forward to those and educating our attendees about where things are. We'll have a very Opportunity Zones 2.0 detailed panel where we'll really be talking about what has changed in the legislation. We're going to have Opportunity Zone business focused panels where business level entities that are trying to attract investments or have successfully attracted investors to their businesses are going to be talking about what they've observed and what their strategies are and how they intend to maybe refocus on rural areas since there are additional benefits that are going to be available. We'll have multiple networking breaks throughout the day. So people will get a chance to really sit and talk to a lot of the experts that are going to be there. As we get into the afternoon, we're going to have a panel that's very specific to what we're looking for in the regulatory process. What we see as short-term, mid-term, long-term regulatory solutions, and what can't be achieved through regulations, because some things are going to require statutory fix, most likely.
Yeah. The stability that we have now, just with the incentive being a permanent part of the tax code, is really generating a lot of interest, right? Prior to permanence, we were kind of coming up on a deadline at the end of 2026, right? And it's kind of creating some uncertainty and maybe limitations on funding. But I think where we're at now with attendance for this year's conference, we're equal to or in excess of what the number of attendees we had last year, and we're still a month and a half out. So
yeah, it's going to be a pretty big group. Really looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it too. I look forward to this conference every year. We've been to some great ones in the past. I remember the Long Beach one was fun out in Southern California. Got a little bit of sun, had some good food in town there. The Cleveland one was a lot of fun because a bunch of us went to the Browns football game that happened to get scheduled. I think the NFL heard that Novogradac was going to be in town. They decided, hey, let's do a Browns game that night. So a bunch of us went there.
Yeah, I think the Broncos were staying at the same.
Yeah, the Broncos were staying at the hotel that we were at. That was fun. The last two that you did were in Washington, D.C. Last year's was phenomenal because we were in the nation's capital on election night. And then we had the conference unfold the next day. It wasn't clear the week leading up to the conference what the outcome of the election was going to be. It was a very tight race between Harris and Trump. We weren't really sure if the Republicans were going to retain control of the Senate or take control of the House. And everybody knows now what happened. And so when we met that next morning, we knew that Trump had won, and it looked pretty clear, but it wasn't 100% sure that the Republicans were going to have the majority in both the House and the Senate. So that really started a lot of discussion over, well, geez, the Republican Party might be able to just have a tax legislation bill go through reconciliation just like they did in 2017. And that'd be great news for OZs. And sure enough, as the months unfolded, we get to July, that's exactly what ended up transpiring. But yeah, heading into that week, we weren't really sure what was going to happen, but it was a lot of fun to see it unfold and be in person with everybody when that all came to fruition.
Yeah, preparing for that was interesting because we prepared on all these different scenarios, expecting really the next morning to probably not have a truly clear picture. And then we did. So, I think either way, regardless of the outcome of the election, we expect that there would be major tax legislation that would happen this year. It just would, because it was a Republican sweep that led to the budget reconciliation process that in some ways sort of smoothed the process for Opportunity Zones, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another point that both of you made was, the last few years, if you only came to really understand what Opportunity Zones were, what they were all about, by the time that some of the benefits had expired, maybe you really figured out Opportunity Zones in 2021 or 22 or 23. and you're kind of looking at the incentives available, and the deferral period's getting shorter and shorter, and some of the basis step ups have already expired. If you're an RIA or a family office or an accounting firm or a law firm, you could kind of afford at that point to just ignore opportunity zones. You don't want to devote a lot of resources into something that's expiring at the end of 2026.
Mhm.
Now that it's permanent, you can't afford not to focus at least part of your firm or part of your strategy on opportunity zones. If you have, particularly if you have any sort of real estate investment strategy, if you're doing any sort of real estate transactions episodically, as some of these big groups do, these big family offices, these RIA groups, these accountants, these law firms. So I think it's looking like you guys hinted at attendance for this year's conference is trending up significantly from where it was a year ago. You know, the past few conferences you guys have done, they've been great. There've been about 100 people in the room. I think we're going to see a very large increase
Yeah.
in attendance this year. Is this going to be the largest OZ summit in years?
Absolutely.
It's on track. Yeah, certainly.
I mean,
Ideally, we'd like to get back to a point where, as you remember, Jimmy, we were doing 2 of these a year, one in the spring, one in the fall, right? But again, as we kind of started getting closer to that expiration date, the interest sort of declined a little bit, right? But
Yep.
yeah, we're definitely seeing an uptick here. And really we're not done, right? Like we mentioned at the beginning, we had a list of potential enhancements, and some of the main suggestions made it, but some of the others are still there, right? And even though we're in a government shutdown, there has been discussion of either another budget reconciliation bill this year, or even a bipartisan tax bill by the end of the year for certain extenders, right? And opportunity zones, I think, are in a strong position to layer in some of these additional enhancements, which really don't have significant cost, the way that the JCT kind of estimates the cost of these tax incentives. So
right, and that's a lot of the work that your group, the Novogradac Opportunity Zone Working Group, stays at the forefront of and lobbies for, and also trades comment letters back and forth with the IRS to get some of these pending issues resolved at some point. If anybody's interested in learning more about that Novogradac Opportunity Zone Working Group, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys about that?
I'm sure certainly our website is a great way. You can Google Novogradac Opportunity Zones Work Group. It'll take you right to our page. We can probably give you a link as well, Jimmy, if you want to post it to the show notes. We'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, and all these comment letters for all these different issues are published right there too. It's a good, helpful reference that I know a lot of people like to refer back to when they try to think about, some of the potential enhancements that are still being discussed.
Good. Well, gentlemen, I think we've done it. I think we've covered just about everything we needed to, and we're almost out of time. Thanks so much to both of you for sharing your insights today. Before we go, I'll just let listeners know if they want to learn more about Novogradac's upcoming conference, or the Novogradac Opportunity Zone Working Group. You can head over to their website at novoco.com. That's NOVOCO.com. Or, as Jason suggested, just do a Google search for Novogradac Opportunity Zones, and it'll pop right up. You can't miss it. And don't forget, by the way, viewers of this podcast, listeners of this show, can save 10% on their tickets for the Novogradac 2025 OZ Summit by using promo code OZ10. That's OZ10 at checkout. Just enter that into the promo code field. And one more plug for the OZ Insiders Dinner coming up on December 2nd. That'll be the night before the Novogradac conference. We wanted to get together because we knew a lot of people would be in town. So if you're not doing anything that night before and you're a member of our OZ Insiders group, you can learn more about that dinner and RSVP. Head over to ozinsiders.com to learn more about that dinner and to join our group. I hope to see a lot of you out there. I think we're expecting big numbers at that dinner this year. Finally, listeners and viewers out there, if you enjoyed today's show, hit that like button, give us a thumbs up. It helps other people find the show. We're going to have show notes available on our website. If you missed anything, we'll have links to all of the resources that we discussed on our website at opportunityzones.com/podcast. Jason, Kevin, thanks for joining the show today. Looking forward to seeing both of you in Vegas in December. Thanks so much.
Great, Jimmy. Thanks for having
Thanks,
us.
Jimmy.